My parents tricked me my whole life, claiming I was embarrassing the family. So growing up, I always thought my life was pretty normal. Well, at least on the surface. My parents, Samantha and Greg, were those types of parents who made sure everything looked perfect. You know the ones? Every family photo was staged, every holiday had to be planned down to the last detail, and my little brother Danny and I were expected to play along no matter what. If you asked anyone from the outside, they'd probably say we had it all together. But trust me, that couldn't have been further from the truth. I think the first time I realized something was really off was when I was about 17. It was a random Tuesday night, and my parents were acting weird. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and suddenly everyone stops talking? Yeah, that was the vibe at dinner. My mom had made her famous lasagna, the one she always pulled out when she wanted to impress someone. But instead of talking about their day like usual, my parents were just staring at each other. I thought, okay, whatever, maybe they had a fight. After dinner, I went upstairs to my room, minding my own business, scrolling through Instagram or whatever, when I suddenly got super thirsty. I tiptoed downstairs to grab some water, trying not to wake anyone. And that's when I heard them. My parents were still in the kitchen, but they weren't arguing. They were whispering. At first I didn't really care, but then I heard my mom say something that stopped me in my tracks. "We can't keep this from her forever, Greg. She has to know at some point." I froze. I mean, what was she talking about? What was this thing they were hiding from me? I'm not the type of person who eavesdrops, but come on, how could I not? My heart was pounding so loud I was scared they'd hear it from the kitchen. I leaned in closer to the doorway, trying to catch every word. "I know," my dad whispered back, sounding super stressed out. "But telling her now, it'll destroy everything. It's better this way. Trust me." That's when I felt like I couldn't breathe. Destroy everything? What were they even talking about? I tried to stay calm, but I could feel my chest tightening. I didn't wait to hear more. I bolted back up to my room and just sat there staring at the wall. I felt like I was going crazy. What could they possibly be hiding that would destroy everything? I didn't sleep that night. My brain was going a million miles a minute, trying to figure it out. I mean, I couldn't be adopted, right? My parents didn't act like I wasn't their kid. I had the same hair color as my mom, and everyone always said I looked like my dad, so that couldn't be it. Maybe it was something to do with my brother, Danny. He was always kind of a mystery to me. He kept to himself, never got in trouble, and never really asked questions. But still, it didn't seem like it was about him. The next morning, everything seemed normal again. My parents acted like nothing had happened, and I didn't have the guts to ask them. But the thing is, once you know there's a secret, you can't unknow it. I became obsessed. I couldn't let it go. I started paying more attention to little things, trying to piece together what they were hiding. Every time my parents had a private conversation, I'd strain my ears to hear it. Every time they went into my dad's office and shut the door, I'd wonder if it was about the secret. Then a couple of weeks later, I found my chance. My parents were out at some event, and Danny was at a friend's house for the night. I was home alone. I knew it was now or never. I had to find out what they were hiding. So I did what any curious, maybe slightly paranoid teenager would do. I started snooping. I started with their bedroom. Nothing unusual there except for the fact that my mom had about 1,000,000 different perfumes. Seriously, who needs that many? Anyway, I didn't find anything interesting in their room, so I moved on to my dad's office. It was always locked when he wasn't home, but that night, unlocked. Jackpot. I felt kind of guilty snooping around, but at the same time, I had to know. I opened drawers, checked behind books, went through files, but nothing really stood out, until I found this old wooden box tucked behind a stack of papers in the bottom drawer. It looked ancient, like something you'd find in an antique shop. My hands were shaking when I opened it. Inside were a bunch of old letters, all yellowed with age, like they hadn't been touched in years. The letters were addressed to my dad, but they weren't from my mom. They were from someone named Rachel, and the things she was saying, well, they made my heart stop. "Greg, I hope Lisa is doing well. I can't believe how big she's gotten. It breaks my heart that I can't be a part of her life, but I know you and Samantha are giving her a better home than I ever could." I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. I kept reading, but every sentence hit harder than the last. "Please tell her one day. She deserves to know the truth. I never stopped thinking about her." Who the hell was Rachel, and why was she talking about me like she was my mom? I flipped through the rest of the letters, but they were all the same. Rachel writing about how much she missed me, how she hoped I was happy, how she wished things had been different. It all started to make sense in the worst way possible. The secret they were hiding? Rachel was my real mom. My whole life had been a lie. The woman I thought was my mom, Samantha, She wasn't my mom at all. She was just pretending. I felt sick. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I shoved the letters back into the box and slammed the drawer shut. I ran out of the office, up to my room, and locked the door. I sat on the floor, hugging my knees, trying to wrap my head around what I had just found out. I wasn't even sure who I was anymore. That night, I couldn't face my parents. I couldn't face anyone. I just laid in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if anything in my life had ever been real. All right, so after that night where I found those letters, I couldn't unsee what I read. I spent the next few days in a fog, barely able to look at my parents. Every time they talked to me, it felt fake, like they were actors in some kind of weird show. Like, how could I even believe anything they said? I felt like I was living with strangers. The hardest part was trying to act normal. I still didn't confront them, even though every fiber of my being was screaming at me to do it. I guess part of me was just scared of what they'd say. What if they denied it? What if they made up more lies? I wasn't ready for that. One night, after a few days of being totally on edge, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided I needed to get out of the house and clear my head, so I texted my best friend Jess. She was always good at talking me down when I was freaking out. We decided to meet up at this little diner we'd always go to after school. When I got there, Jess could immediately tell something was off. I didn't even need to say anything before she was like, "What's going on, Lisa? You look like you've seen a ghost or something." I kind of laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. More like that nervous, awkward laugh you do when you don't know what to say. "You're not going to believe this," I started. But even as I said it, I wasn't sure how to explain. I mean, how do you just drop, "Hey, my whole life's been a lie, and my real mom is some random woman named Rachel"? I took a deep breath and just spilled everything. I told Jess about the letters, about what I overheard my parents saying, and how I'd been freaking out ever since. She sat there, wide-eyed, just listening. By the time I finished, her mouth was hanging open. For a minute, she didn't say anything, and I started thinking I'd gone completely insane. Like, maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But then Jess shook her head and said, "Lisa, this is messed up. You need to talk to them, like for real. You can't just sit on this forever." I knew she was right, but that didn't make it any easier. I felt like my life was this glass house, and the second I threw that rock, everything would shatter. Still, I couldn't pretend anymore. I had to confront them. So the next night, I did it. I waited until after dinner when Danny had already gone upstairs. My parents were sitting in the living room, watching one of those true crime shows they were obsessed with. I just stood there for a second, my heart pounding in my chest, wondering how I was supposed to start. Finally, I just blurted it out. "Who's Rachel?" The second the words left my mouth, my mom paused the TV and the room fell into this awkward silence. My dad didn't say anything, but he turned to look at my mom, like he was waiting for her to handle it. Typical. My dad never handled anything. My mom's face went pale, and for a second, I thought she might actually faint. She took a deep breath and said, "Where did you hear that name?" "I found the letters," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know she's my real mom." I watched as my dad's face crumpled. He looked like he'd just been punched in the gut. "My mom, though?" She went into full denial mode. "You had no right to go through our things," she snapped, standing up from the couch. "We've done everything for you, Lisa. We raised you. We gave you a good life. What more do you want?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "What do I want? I want the truth. You've been lying to me my whole life." She tried to argue back, saying something about how they were protecting me, how Rachel wasn't fit to be a mother, and how they did what was best for me. But all I could think about was how they never gave me a choice. They decided what was best for me without even asking me if I'd want to know the truth. My dad finally spoke up, his voice shaky. "Lisa, we always meant to tell you, but we didn't know how. We thought it was better if you didn't know." I shook my head, tears burning in my eyes. "You thought it was better to lie to me? To make me think I had this perfect life when it was all fake?" For the first time, my dad looked at me, really looked at me, and I could see the guilt in his eyes. "We never wanted to hurt you," he said softly. We didn't know how to tell you." That's when I realized something. They weren't just lying to protect me. They were lying to protect themselves. My mom didn't want people to know she wasn't my real mom because it would ruin the image she'd built up. And my dad, he didn't have the guts to go against her. I wiped my eyes and took a deep breath. "I need to meet her," I said, my voice firm. "I need to know who she is." My mom started to protest, but I didn't care. I'd made up my mind. I was going to find Rachel, no matter what. My whole life had been built on lies, and I deserved to know the truth. I wasn't going to let them keep that from me any longer. That night, I stayed up late, searching online for any trace of Rachel. I didn't have much to go on, just her first name and a few old letters, but I was determined. After hours of searching, I finally found something. It was an old Facebook profile, barely used, but it was definitely her. I recognized her face from the pictures and the letters. I stared at the screen for what felt like forever, my finger hovering over the send message button. My heart was racing, and my hands were shaking. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading and hoping for all at once. Finally, I took a deep breath and typed out the message. Hi Rachel, I'm Lisa. I think you're my mom. I hit send before I could second guess myself and immediately felt like throwing up. There was no going back now. I'd opened the door to a whole new world of chaos, and I had no idea what was waiting for me on the other side. So after I sent that message to Rachel, I was a wreck. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach did a backflip, thinking it was her. I didn't know what to expect. Like, what do you even say to the woman who gave you up and then stayed hidden for almost 2 decades? The days dragged by, and nothing. No response. I started doubting myself, thinking maybe she wouldn't want to meet me, or worse, maybe she didn't care at all. Maybe my parents were right about her being a mess. But then, out of nowhere, about a week later, I got the message. Hi, Lisa. I've been waiting for this message for a long time. I'd love to meet you. That was it. Just 2 sentences, but my hands were shaking like crazy. I didn't even know how to feel. Part of me was relieved, but the other part? Scared out of my mind. I didn't know what she'd be like or if this was going to be a complete disaster. But I had to know. I had to meet her. We set a time to meet at this little coffee shop a couple of towns over, probably so we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. I didn't tell my parents about it, obviously. They were already pissed about me even reaching out to Rachel, and I wasn't in the mood for another screaming match. Besides, this was something I needed to do on my own. The day we were supposed to meet, I was a wreck. I couldn't eat, I couldn't focus. My brain was going wild with all the what-ifs. What if she didn't show up? What if she showed up and I hated her? What if she didn't even recognize me? I got to the coffee shop about 20 minutes early because, of course, I was too nervous to sit at home and wait. The place was small and quiet, and I grabbed a seat by the window so I could see her when she came in. Every time the door opened, my heart did this weird thing where it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest, and then there she was. She looked, well, kind of like me, which was weird and comforting at the same time. She had the same dark hair, the same nose. It was like looking at an older version of myself. She was a little thinner than I expected, and she looked nervous too. She spotted me right away and smiled. I couldn't even manage to smile back. I just kind of sat there, frozen. She walked over, and the first thing she said was, Hi, Lisa. You look just like I imagined. I didn't know what to say. My throat felt like it was closing up, but I managed a quiet, Hi. Not the grand opening line I had in my head, but it was something. We sat down, and for a minute we didn't say anything. It was awkward as hell. I was just sitting there, stirring my coffee, even though I hadn't even added sugar. She kept looking at me like she was trying to figure out what to say. Finally, she broke the silence. I know this must be really strange for you, she said, her voice soft. I've thought about this moment for so long, but now that it's here, I don't know where to start. I nodded, still not sure what to say. I mean, how do you start a conversation with the person who gave birth to you, but has been a stranger your whole life? Why didn't you ever try to reach out to me? I asked, finally managing to get some words out. I'd been wondering that since I read her letters. I mean, she sent them, but never pushed harder. Never fought to see me. I needed to know why. Rachel sighed and looked down at her hands. I did at first, but your parents, they didn't want me in your life. And honestly, at the time, I wasn't in a good place. I was young, broke, and struggling. I thought it was better for you to stay with them. They could give you a life I couldn't. She paused and looked up at me, her eyes full of this sadness that I wasn't ready for. I always wanted to be in your life, Lisa, but I didn't want to mess things up for you. Every time I thought about pushing harder, I was scared it would make things worse. I didn't know how to respond. I mean, what do you even say to that? Part of me understood, but another part of me was pissed. She just let them take me. She let them raise me with all their lies. I felt like I'd been cheated out of knowing my real mom because she didn't fight for me. I don't know, I said, my voice shaky. I get why you did it, but it doesn't make it easier. They lied to me. My whole life, they made me think everything was perfect, and then I find out you've been here the whole time, and I never knew. Rachel reached across the table and took my hand, and for some reason I didn't pull away. I'm so sorry, Lisa. I never wanted you to be hurt. If I could go back, I'd do things differently, but I can't change the past. All I can do now is be here for you, if you want me to be. That hit hard. I wasn't ready for that kind of emotional punch. I didn't know if I wanted her in my life or not. This whole thing was too fresh, too raw. But at the same time, she was my mom. Not the woman who raised me, but my real mom. And there was a part of me that wanted to know her, that wanted to know what I'd missed all these years. I don't know what I want, I said, trying to be honest. I mean, I'm glad we're talking, but this is all a lot. I'm still trying to figure it out. Rachel nodded like she understood. Take your time. We don't have to figure everything out right now. I'm here when you're ready. We talked for a while longer after that, mostly small stuff. She told me a little bit about her life, how she'd finally gotten her act together, how she had a job and a place of her own now. She asked me about school, about what I like to do, and it was weird because it was like she was trying to catch up on all the years she'd missed. When we finally said goodbye, she hugged me and it felt right. I didn't expect that. I thought it would be weird, but it wasn't. It was the first time I'd felt like maybe I wasn't alone in all of this. I didn't have all the answers yet, but meeting Rachel was a start. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, things would start to make sense. All right, so after I met Rachel, I thought things would start to settle down. Like, I figured I'd get some answers, maybe have some peace of mind. But nope. If anything, my life got even messier. I wasn't ready for how complicated things would get once I got back home. So, after the whole coffee shop meeting, I decided not to tell my parents right away. I mean, I was still processing everything, and honestly, I didn't want another massive argument. But you know how things always have a way of catching up to you? Yeah, that's exactly what happened. One night I was in my room just doing my usual mindless scrolling through social media when my mom knocked on my door. I hadn't really spoken much to her or my dad since our last argument, and I could tell she was still holding on to some of that anger. Anyway, she comes in, sits on the edge of my bed, and does that thing where she sighs really loud like she's trying to let me know she's upset without actually saying anything. Classic Samantha move. We need to talk, she finally says, and right away, I get that sinking feeling in my stomach. You know when someone says that and it's never good news? Yeah, that was this moment. About what? I asked, pretending like I didn't already know where this was going. I had a feeling she'd somehow found out about Rachel. She didn't even wait for me to finish my sentence before diving right in. I know you've been in contact with her. I froze. My heart started racing, and I could feel my hands getting all clammy. Her meant Rachel, obviously. There was no mistaking that tone of voice. How do you know? I stammered, my mind racing. I hadn't told them, and Rachel wasn't exactly broadcasting our meetup on social media. My mom gave me this icy glare. Greg saw you at the coffee shop, she said, her words sharp and accusing. I didn't even know my dad had been in that area that day, but apparently he'd been running some errands and spotted me. Talk about bad timing. Why didn't you tell us? She demanded, her voice getting louder. You went behind our backs and met with her. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like she was playing the victim, making it seem like I was the one who had betrayed them. The nerve of it all was too much. I snapped. Everything you've done for me? You mean all the lies? All the times you made me think I had a perfect family when the truth was the exact opposite? My voice was shaking, but I didn't care. I was too pissed to keep calm anymore. My mom's face turned red, and I could see she was barely keeping it together. We did what we thought was best for you, Lisa. You don't understand how hard it was. We gave you a life Rachel could never provide. She wasn't ready to be a mother. But you never gave me the choice, I yelled back. You decided for me. You made that decision without even thinking about what I'd want. You don't get to control my life like that. Just then, my dad walked in. He must have heard us shouting from downstairs because he looked tired, like he didn't want to deal with any of this. But there he was, standing in the doorway, watching us go at it. Lisa, please, he said softly, like he was trying to be the calm one. We're your parents. We raised you. We did what we thought was right at the time. We didn't want to confuse you when you were young. I turned to him, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. I'm not confused. I'm angry. You kept Rachel from me my whole life. You made me think everything was fine, but now everything's upside down and it's your fault. For a second, my dad just stood there, rubbing his face like he was trying to figure out what to say. But my mom, she wasn't done. You're being ungrateful, she spat, standing up from my bed. You think Rachel is going to swoop in and be the mother you've always wanted? She gave you up, Lisa. She abandoned you. Her words stung, but I knew she was just trying to hurt me, trying to manipulate me, like she always did. She didn't abandon me, I said, quieter now but still firm. She wasn't ready. You're the ones who kept her away. At this point, my dad stepped in between us. Enough, he said, his voice stern for once. We're not going to get anywhere by yelling at each other. I could tell he was trying to play peacemaker, but it was too late for that. The damage was already done. My mom stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. My dad just stood there for a minute, staring at the ground. I'm sorry, Lisa, he said after what felt like forever. We really thought we were doing the right thing. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I didn't know what to say to him. All I knew was that things between us would never be the same again. After he left, I sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind was racing with everything that had just happened. The fight, the accusations, the truth about Rachel. It was all too much to handle. I felt like my entire world had been flipped upside down, and there was no going back. The next morning, my mom didn't speak to me. She didn't even look at me. She acted like I didn't exist, which honestly was fine by me. I wasn't in the mood to deal with her passive-aggressive nonsense. My dad tried to make things feel normal, asking me about school and stuff, but it was awkward as hell. I could tell he was walking on eggshells, and it made me feel even worse. Later that day, I got a message from Rachel. She said she had a lot more she wanted to tell me, and that if I was up for it, we could meet again. I didn't hesitate. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them from my parents. I didn't tell anyone where I was going when I left the house. I just grabbed my keys and drove. This time, I was determined to get the whole truth, no matter how hard it was to hear. All right. So after everything that went down with my parents, I knew I couldn't keep living in the dark. I had to meet Rachel again, and this time, I needed her to tell me everything. I didn't want any more vague answers or sugar-coated stories. I wanted the truth, no matter how messed up it was. We decided to meet at the same coffee shop as before. When I walked in, Rachel was already sitting there, sipping on a cup of tea, looking a little more relaxed than the first time we met. I wasn't. My stomach was in knots. This time, I was ready to get real. But I had no idea what was coming. I sat down and she smiled at me, but I could tell she knew something was up. I didn't waste any time. Rachel, I need to know everything. No more half-truths. No more trying to protect me. I deserve to know what really happened. She put her cup down and sighed. It was that kind of sigh you do when you're about to admit something you've been holding on to for way too long. I braced myself. Okay, Lisa, she said quietly, looking me straight in the eyes. You're right. You deserve to know the whole story. And then she started. She told me that she and Greg, yeah, my dad, had dated when they were young, back in college. It was a whirlwind thing, and they were both way too immature to handle it. When she found out she was pregnant with me, everything fell apart. My dad freaked out and basically told her he wasn't ready to be a father, which didn't surprise me. He's always been the type to avoid responsibility whenever things got tough. But here's where things took a wild turn. Rachel said that my mom, Samantha, was actually a close friend of hers back then. They weren't best friends or anything, but they were in the same social circles. When Samantha found out Rachel was pregnant and that Greg didn't want to step up, she swooped in. I'm talking like full-on rescue mode. Apparently, Samantha had always wanted kids, but she had some health issues that made it hard for her to get pregnant. So when she found out Rachel was going to have me, she made a deal with her. I was scared, Lisa, Rachel admitted, her voice shaking a little. I didn't know what to do. I was 20, broke, and alone. Samantha offered me what I thought was the perfect solution. She said she and Greg could give you the life I couldn't. She convinced me it was the best thing for you. I just sat there, trying to process everything. My mom, the woman who had raised me, had basically orchestrated this whole thing. She took advantage of Rachel's fear and insecurity to take me away from her. It wasn't just some random adoption story. This was a plan, and everyone had kept it from me. I didn't want to give you up, Rachel said, tears starting to form in her eyes. But I thought I was doing what was right. I thought you'd have a better life with them, and I was too scared to fight back. I felt this deep, hollow pit forming in my chest. I wasn't mad at Rachel. I could see how scared she must have been back then. But my parents? They had lied to me my entire life. They didn't just raise me. They manipulated my whole story to fit their perfect little image. Why didn't you come back for me? I asked, my voice shaky. I wanted to, she whispered, wiping away a tear. But once they had you, they made it clear that I wasn't welcome in your life. They told me that if I tried to contact you, they'd cut me out completely. I was young, Lisa. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. That hit me like a ton of bricks. My mom and dad had basically threatened Rachel to keep her out of my life. They didn't want me to know the truth because it didn't fit their perfect family narrative. They wanted control, and they were willing to lie and manipulate to get it. I sat there in silence for what felt like forever, just trying to process everything Rachel had told me. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me again, but it wasn't directed at Rachel. It was at my parents. They had been the ones to lie to me for years, to keep Rachel away, to make me believe this fake story about my life. "I'm so sorry, Lisa," Rachel said, reaching across the table to grab my hand. "I wish I'd been stronger back then. I wish I had fought harder for you." I didn't know what to say. Part of me was still angry at her, but the bigger part of me just felt sad for both of us. We'd been robbed of the chance to know each other, all because my parents couldn't handle the truth. "I don't blame you," I finally said, squeezing her hand back. "But I don't know what to do now." Rachel nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. "It's not going to be easy, but I'm here now if you want me to be." That was the hardest part. Deciding if I wanted her in my life. I mean, she was my biological mom, but I didn't really know her. And after everything that had happened, I wasn't sure if I could trust anyone anymore. But I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back to the way things were. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine with my parents when they had lied to me for so long. Something had to change. When I got home that night, I was exhausted. I hadn't told Rachel whether I wanted to see her again, but I knew deep down that I did. It was just going to take time. As soon as I walked through the front door, my dad was waiting for me. He must have heard me pull into the driveway because he was sitting in the living room, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "We need to talk," he said, standing up and walking over to me. I was too tired to argue, so I just nodded and sat down. "I know you've been meeting with Rachel," he said, his voice low and tired. "And I know you're angry." "Angry doesn't even begin to cover it," I said, crossing my arms. "You lied to me, Dad. You and Mom both. You made me believe this perfect story when it was all fake." He sat down next to me, rubbing his hands together like he always did when he was nervous. "We thought we were doing what was best for you." I shook my head. "No, you were doing what was best for you. You wanted control, and you didn't care how much it would hurt me in the long run." He didn't say anything, just sat there in silence. For once, he didn't try to argue or justify what they did. He just sat there looking defeated. "I don't know what's going to happen next," I told him, standing up to leave. "But things aren't going to be the same. I can't pretend anymore." And with that, I walked upstairs, leaving him sitting there alone in the mess they had created.